Hey, are you watching this video without being subscribed? We recently looked over the channel analytics, and apparently a lot of people who watch the channel have not yet subscribed. So if you enjoy this channel, please subscribe. Not only will this ensure new episodes pop up in your feed, it also helps this content reach more people. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. So again, I'm sitting here as an atheist looking at something like Buddhism or other things, and I'm saying, my question isn't how can I feel really good for the next 80 years? My question is what worldview explains the nature of reality the best, and what are the implications of that for the question of how should I live in the world? So I recently had a conversation with my friend Troy Leavitt. Troy has been an online friend of mine for several years, as we have interacted in various forums. Troy grew up a member of the church, served a mission, but left in the mid-90s after losing his belief in the truth claims of the church. Troy got involved in the scientific skepticism movement and later became a big fan of new atheists like Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett. Troy is also a well-known video game developer and became a fairly significant public figure in the online gaming world during the Gamergate controversy as he pushed back on the social justice activism in the gaming world until his retirement amid activist pressure in 2021. Troy is one of my favorite people to engage with online. I consider him one of my good atheist friends, and in this discussion, we explore what happens when people lose their faith, and questions about where atheism logically leads, and we begin by exploring a notion known as the substitution hypothesis. So we were talking about the substitution hypothesis, so let's talk a little bit more about that. What is this substitution hypothesis?
Yeah, so the idea is that when you give up your religious beliefs, whether it's at an individual level or even a societal level, that all the things that religion was doing for the adherents before must be replaced. It has to be substituted for in one way or another. And this is a list of some of those things that religion generally provides for you that then end up being substituted for if you become a secularist or if you leave religion. And you can see how the substitution hypothesis works often at changing an original belief into something new to make it fit a more secular worldview, which is pretty much what this is all about. Yeah.
And this is something that for me, I oftentimes talk about you don't get to, it isn't if you have faith, it's what have you placed your faith in. Or yes, I'll say that everyone has a religion, and we can quibble over the definition of religion, but whatever this thing is that a person utilizes as sort of the narrative that they base their life upon and the way that they think, and because there has to be some sort of grounding narrative. Now, if I'm not mistaken, again, kind of steel man here, that's sort of what the substitution hypothesis is saying. It's saying that people, if they leave a religion, they're going to replace it with something, and that something, yes, I might say is a religion of sorts. It's functionally filling the role that quote unquote religion plays.
Yes, that's exactly correct. That it functionally fills the same role that religion was playing in somebody's life previously, and the idea is that the need for this orientation to the universe is so great for us as humans, is that even if you give up your religious framework, you will find something new. It's just, it may be a secular framework or something else. But you do have to orient yourself. Yeah.
And can you say that people may even do that subconsciously, like that they don't? Oh,
yes, yeah.
They don't it isn't like you consciously go out and say, this is my new worldview. You'll just adopt some other worldview by osmosis, sort of.
Yeah, if you don't specifically go out looking for something, like what is it that I believe now, if you don't go and hunt that down, you will just start to integrate from your culture, your society, or whatever's going on around you, your new background or your new moral values, your new moral framework will start to permeate. And we see a lot of that as religion has kind of at least temporarily been swept away in the West, and it's being replaced by a lot of these political ideologies and activist movements and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And you
we definitely
say,
see it.
and you talk about sort of political ideologies, obviously, or something. You have on here self-help movements, kind of the therapeutic sort
Yes,
of
yeah,
worldview where everything is about your feelings and therapy and trauma. And I feel like that's, and not to say that there isn't a use for therapy, or there isn't a use for, or there isn't real like trauma that happens to people psychologically, but there are people that kind of like sort of your psychological state becomes the whole nexus of your entire world.
yes, yeah, yeah. That there is that thing where people become so like kind of self-focused, on themselves that yeah, it becomes it's kind of a narcissistic exercise in what is it that I really love or something, and yeah, they get lost in these cul-de-sacs of hedonism or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the substitution hypothesis, this is kind of the second slide here, but these are all the things that you're going to need if you blow up your religion. I'm over there blowing up the temple just because I could in Grok, but you're going to have existential comfort. What's it all about? Why you here? There's often a criticism that goes along with this where people start criticizing traditional religion. That doesn't have to be the case, but it often is the case. And then there's the whole psychological continuity, right? That you have to reorient yourself to how you view the entire world and what role you play in it. And so
Yeah.
it's a huge, huge deal. And part of the reason I wanted to show the Four Horsemen and Ayaan Hirsi Ali is to point that the substitution hypothesis is even at work at that level, right? That Ayaan Hirsi Ali came to find her atheistic beliefs did not fulfill these needs, these exact needs, and so she came over to Christianity looking for a way to fill these needs in particular. Some of them are political. She is resisting Islam, especially radical Islam and some of the woke ideologies. But in particular, she found atheism to be insufficient to offer her the comfort, to offer her the moral guidance and stuff. So she is an example of somebody who was an atheist, found it insufficient, and has come back to Christianity.
Well, and as people go about substituting, their old beliefs with new beliefs, I do wonder. I guess that's always the question I kind of am asking people. I always want to understand, okay, so what are these new beliefs? How are you sort of grounding it? In other words, what I'm asking them is, what is your new religion? Because in my mind, what I really don't like, and I think that this is something that it's very easy to tear down a building. It's very hard to build something.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so you get people who become sort of cynics and critics, and that's all they are. It's like all you do is say, "Well, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I don't find that convincing." And it's sort of like, all right, well, what do you find convincing? Because you don't live your life based on what you don't believe. You live it based on what you do believe.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that there's one of my sort of challenges that I have. And again, this is where I find there are atheists who I find much more interesting and compelling are the ones who are trying to build some sort of a framework in the world because they're participating in sort of solving the problem, right? Where so many of them, if you're just a critic, if that's all, and I'm fine with being critical of things, but it's sort of like a balance. It's like if all you do is critique everyone else, you're not offering anything to the world,
Right.
you know?
Well, one of the things I hear a lot in the Exmo community is the term deconstruct. You're going to
Yes.
deconstruct your faith, tear it down, tear everything down. And I'm like, why is that the term? I know it came out of, Derrida and that sort of stuff, or deconstructing language, although I don't think a lot of the modern Mormons or the modern Exmos know that. But why is it deconstruct and not investigate? Why is it explore or understand or study? Why is it always deconstruct and tear things down? And I'm like, it wasn't like that when I was leaving the church. When I was investigating, I was trying to find out if the church was true, not let's tear it down and prove it's false, which seems to be the direction that a lot of the XMO community, to me, now seems to lean in.
Well,
Deconstruct your faith.
And
Yeah.
deconstruction is seen as a virtue in and of itself.
Yeah.
And in my mind, it's like, I look at it with a view of very much like like building a house. I tell people I went through a faith remodeling. And guess what? As part of my faith remodeling, it wasn't a faith crisis, I had to deconstruct things. Like that was part of it. There are things that when you start to test them, you realize this isn't very good. This is shaky. Maybe I need to deconstruct this. But the intention wasn't just, hey, let's just deconstruct everything so I can live out in the cold and freeze to death.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like I'm trying to figure out what's true at the end of the day. And I'm going to, the language I would use is I'm going to place my faith somewhere. I'm going to place my bet on some sort of a worldview because otherwise you're paralyzed.
Right. I very much agree with that. And even if you try and deny that, if you're like, well, I'm not going to figure it out, I'm just going to live kind of a hedonistic lifestyle or whatever, it'll catch up with you. Eventually, you'll find yourself in a position of like, well, what am I doing here? Why am I here? And why don't I just off myself, right? You end up in that existential crisis. Britt Hartley, I don't know if you know who she is, but she talks quite a bit about when she lost her faith, sliding into that nihilistic worldview of nothing matters anymore. And it's really difficult to kind of rebuild yourself after you've deconstructed what was your entire framework.
Yeah.
So I advanced the slide here because the way that the substitution hypothesis works itself into things is that it often just inverts what things used to be. So I've noticed, that in the ex-Mormon sphere, there's kind of this blue church. There's kind of this like, if the LDS church is kind of red leaning, well, then the blue church at ex-Mormons is kind of blue leaning, right? It's kind of democratic leaning or something. And there's a lot of things that just get adopted. People just accept almost as a direct substitution for what it was they used to believe without even recognizing they've done it. And this is an example. I put this here of one that I've seen happens a lot in the ex-Mormon blue church. I should say the word oikophobic, in case anybody doesn't know what that means. That just means fear of what is familiar. And so when a lot of ex-Mormons leave, I notice that they have a fear of what they used to accept, right? They can't accept it anymore because they see it as somehow endorsing a value that they used to hold. They like, there's this real weird, like I have to invert it. And the example I used here is, so in the LDS faith, you are a fallen person, right? You are, the natural man is an enemy to God.
I would say probably in the Christian faith. I like to do that too, by the way, is people will say, oh, in the Mormon church, it's like, you do realize that's a tenet of Christianity,
yes,
not just that. But anyway, fallen state, go ahead.
No, you're totally right. Yeah, that in Christianity, yes, Mormons, they don't believe in original sin quite the same way that normal Christians do. But yeah, and this gets replaced, I believe, by kind of this notion of white privilege, right? When they come out with that same sort of, I'm fallen person, even though I didn't do anything personally, my history, the ongoing alleged systemic racism, the ongoing history of people who lived hundreds of years ago often, somehow that poison has dripped through to me, right? And so I also am possessed of this original sin. It's very similar, and it serves the exact same purpose. You'll notice that people confess their white privilege all the time. They'll get up there and they'll acknowledge it, and they'll say, oh, I'm so privileged. And it's just like saying, oh, I'm a sinner. It serves the same psychological purpose. It serves the same virtue signal to the rest of your group, saying, look, I am fallen. It's not like even a transformation. It's like a direct substitution. You go right from being a fallen state right into this notion of white privilege. You go from the biblical notion of having denied God, and now you take on new prophets like Ibram Kendi or Robin DiAngelo without even knowing it, right? They just adopt right in these kind of things that are in the zeitgeist. And then in the end, they end up with this moral responsibility. They're like, oh, well, because I have this fallen state or my white privilege, I now need to address these inherited conditions. And so you become, my new thing that I should do is I'm supposed to become an advocate or an ally. And it's just like original sin, right? Oh, I have to fix myself now from this new thing that's wrong. Well, and this is just one example, right? There's a lot.
And there's so many, and those parallels of the parallels to things like, well, I forget who it was I was reading, but they said that the excesses of the modern world are actually excesses of Christian ideas, right? So like the idea is, you grew up in a society that thinks all human beings have some equal dignity and moral worth. And so they take that to the absolute extreme of saying, because we are all equal in our worth and dignity, therefore everyone should have equal outcomes in every aspect of life. And if any group of people shows that they have a lesser outcome, it has to do with some sort of oppression that is holding them back. And so you end up in this weird world where because it's funny, like the ultimate sin today in the blue church, as it were, is racism, right?
Right.
That's the worst thing you could possibly be. And what's funny about that is that they don't realize how sort of socially contingent that is. Literally the whole world up until 1945 thought, like, everyone was like, yeah, I'm racist. Like, if you went to a Roman and you were like, to a Roman, you're like, you're being racist. They just look at you and be like, I know. Like, they don't like, they have to ask themselves, where are you getting this notion that there's a need for equality amongst all people? Like, that's not, you brought up Aristotle earlier on. Like, Aristotle and those guys explicitly said that the natural order is that there are some who rule and some who are meant to be ruled.
Well, that's partially true. I think that there was also a lot of the Stoics and others who did recognize, even among the Greeks and Romans, that a certain value in human life, right? They wanted to extend their laws to recognize the essential humanity of others, even in the Greek and Roman times, which is why when they, like when the Romans moved into an area, they would allow them to keep a lot of their own religious beliefs and everything else. They didn't necessarily see them as equal, right? But they did see value in them. So it's not quite a black and white issue where they were always looking down on others. But you're right that racism historically is very tribal and has been around for most of human history. It's quite recent that we have the notion of universal human rights. That's just a couple hundred years old, going back maybe into the Enlightenment time frame. Some of the Christian Enlightenment philosophers there, but not much more than that. Doesn't go back much further than that. Anyway, so I just moving along. So this is, to me, it seems a better approach to religion in general, is what I call the anthropological approach. And over here, I have a quote from Jonathan Streeter. So what we've been doing, Jonathan and I have made the series of videos over on his channel, which is Thoughts on Things and Stuff. And just over here, his quote says, from Jonathan, looking at religion as a bunch of truth and authority claims leads to abandoning and demonizing it. Looking at religion as an evolved set of values, norms, and principles conveyed and reinforced through ritual, mythology, and story and community makes the literal truth of any claim less important than the living impact of the thing as a whole. And so, like, he and I have been doing this series. And so some of the stuff that we're about to talk about is also covered in this series. But like, you can see that very first one with Jonathan Streeter, it's subtitled, How He Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Church, right? You got a couple ex-Mormons in there talking about the values of being part of the religious tradition of Mormonism as the very first one. But then we went through, game theory, evolution of morality, religion as social technology. There's free will. I talk a lot about compatibilism in that one. And then our fifth one there is about Lisa the Iconoclast and kind of using the idea of, even if the originator of a faith turns out to have some problems, that doesn't mean that everything that the originator brought is also suspect. Anyway, I wanted to bring that up, and also if anybody is interested in this direction, we're over there on Jonathan Streeter's channel doing a little different approach to religion. So now we get to what I think is the Hansen straw man.
Oh boy, here we go.
This is what I think I've heard you say about stuff, and so I'm going to throw it out to you if you're like, yeah, this is pretty close to what I think happens with atheism, which is that atheism leads to amoral postmodern Marxism. And to me, I've heard you speak of philosophers like Nietzsche and Foucault, sometimes Derrida, Hegel, Marx, and that basically I believe your position is that without God, there is no morality, no free will, no purpose, and everything reduces to power and preference. It's all about oppressor and oppressed. And my thought is that I think this is a genuine criticism, but not all secular beliefs are woke postmodernism or nihilistic agony. Like my main complaint about what I think is your straw man here is that you're looking at one potential avenue that you could go down, but there's a lot of different places you could be secular and have a worthwhile life. This isn't your only avenue.
So I would say that I don't necessarily. I would say yes, those are my positions. I'm open to revising them if indeed I can be shown that they, like for instance, atheism invariably leads to an amoral postmodern Marxism. I would say that it logically leads to those conclusions, I think, when pressed hard enough. That's where it ends up taking you. I think that when I say that maybe that there is no purpose, no morality, I mean that in sort of an objective universal sense, right? I don't believe that there are objective moral values and duties that are incumbent upon human beings, but it doesn't mean that you can't make up some purpose. Like my purpose is to go out there and, like a local purpose to you. My purpose is to go out and, solve world hunger or whatever. Like, yeah, okay, fine. But there's no non-self-invented purpose for humanity itself. We just are a random accident of the universe, right? And then I don't believe all secular beliefs are woke, postmodernism, or nihilistic agony. I think that there are many secular belief sets out there that I think are internally inconsistent and incoherent. And I think that the woke postmodernist and or nihilistic view of the world is actually the most logically consistent internally, is probably the way that I would frame it. So I'm saying more or less, yes. What you put here is more or less what I think, with some caveats and a little softer language.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah. I was probably putting it a little forward, but I've often heard you put it a little forward. Like,
Yeah,
hey,
no,
if you leave the
I don't
church,
have any problem with that.
So I want to say that I agree that this is an avenue that somebody could go down, right? That nihilism sort of, you start to view the world through power and preference. And I kind of want to acknowledge that you are on the right track for several of these philosophers. Nietzsche and his will to power, Foucault sees it all as power and preference, Marx, oppressor and oppressed. These are all about orienting to power, right? Power is the big thing that all of these philosophers orient themselves around. Mm-hmm. And, the power to make yourself live. But I want to point out, or where I'm going with this, is power is not the only framework through which you can view the world, right? That there are other ways that you can also view the world that are secular or atheistic, if you prefer. Some which might be a bit surprising, but so.
Yeah, well, let's go into it. I'm happy to, again, I want to kind of steel man other points of view.
So here I put 9. There are even more, right? But these are just some ideas, and I've got all 9 of these lined up here, but I was only going to talk in depth a little bit about the first 2. But these are all different ways that you can approach the world from a secular standpoint, an atheistic standpoint, if you prefer, that give you a lot of what's in that substitution hypothesis, those needs, fulfill those needs, but without having God or a traditionally religious background to root them in. So like Buddhism, the secular interpretation of Buddhism is orients itself around suffering, right? The whole idea of Buddhism, rather than power, is that to live is to suffer, is basically the idea that we're always unfulfilled. Suffering is kind of a strong version of the word. The word that's used is usually, I think, dukkha, which means dissatisfaction. So you live your life dissatisfied. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind Buddhism is that once you recognize this, you can begin through meditation to focus on your inner peace, understanding what suffering means through human means, and then you can escape the suffering both for yourself in this life, and then there is a mystical version of Buddhism that you don't have to adopt, but you can escape samsara, or actually, transition to a higher level. And this is the stuff that comes out of Buddhism, the basics. So all I really wanted to get at here, I don't know if we want to go down the Buddhism rabbit hole too much, other than to say, here is a secular worldview that doesn't require God, but there are 800 million Buddhists on the planet right now who find this sufficient enough to fulfill the substitution hypothesis, that they can live like this and have some degree of happiness, purpose, fulfillment, and meaning in life. At least enough, for them to be reasonably happy, I suppose.
Okay, so to kind of steelman that, so the idea here is that within this particular tradition, it isn't power and preference. It's
Right.
ultimately, in fact, largely in Buddhism, the idea is to stop, to kind of let the self go, in a
Yes.
way. It's sort of you focusing on, it's, what is it? It's sort of your desires are the problem. And when you can learn to just let things be, and to kind of, that's sort of the meditative state that people want to go into within Buddhism, is to stop desiring. Isn't Buddhism, it teaches that desire is sort of the problem, because
Yes.
we have all these desires for different things, and then if we can sort of shut those off, then what will happen is like in meditation, you stop judging the world and you sort of just accept the world as it is, and you notice it. And that allows you to transcend the suffering, because suffering emerges from the desires that we have and our lack of being able to fulfill every single desire. Is that?
I think that's the basics of it. Suffering, because we in the West tend to think of suffering as really being bad. It's more about a recognition of how reality, they would say, or a Buddhist would say, kind of truly is, and that it's really being created by you. There's a notion of emptiness that goes along with the Buddhist way of viewing the world, in that all values, everything that you perceive is something that you are adding onto the world, right? So a lot of Buddhism is just beginning to accept the world as empty for what it is, without trying to shape it, adjust it, or anything else. Just acceptance. And that's a key part of the meditative process, is learning how to accept the world as it truly is. And there's a lot of peace in this too, because you start to recognize through your meditative practice that you're really kind of torturing yourself all the time with your thoughts about what you're striving for, what you're craving, or replaying all these conversations in your head, or trying to figure out stuff out. And so basically through Buddhism you start to recognize, oh, there's a peaceful way I can live my life, and I can actually reduce a lot of these suffering things, and also feel happier at the same time. So, and it's been around longer than Christianity has, and still has hundreds of millions of adherents. And when I was on my mission, I had a really hard time trying to convince Buddhists to even consider Christianity, because they didn't see any value in it. It was really kind of
Yeah,
hard.
and I would, and so I guess are there things about Buddhism that you maybe don't think that I understand, or are you curious why I wouldn't think that this is a viable option for a worldview? What's kind of your, what do you see me as missing from understanding in Buddhism?
Well, mostly that you never mention it as a potential secular or atheistic way of viewing the world. That people can live this way and have satisfaction. But when I hear you, it's usually like, oh no, that's not a viable option. The only way is this Foucault Nietzschean power and preference direction.
I see this as I see Foucault, Nietzsche, and those. I look at them as far more comprehensive and powerful in what they're saying than Buddhism. Frankly, my view of Buddhism is, and I have a lot of appreciation for Buddhism. But I look at Buddhism, or I guess sort of the question I would ask is, what's the difference between Buddhism and like therapy?
Well, quite a lot actually. I
Well,
mean,
well, I mean, I mean, obviously, difference maybe in in its methodologies, maybe, but ultimately, it's just saying here is a way to have a psychological state that is really peaceful for you, and and sort of implied in that that's sort of the purpose of life. The purpose of life is to be at peace, and I don't know that, and by peace I mean a psychological state of feeling good about things.
right, or
And
a psychological state of understanding might be a little bit closer, but yes, but I see what you're saying. The thing that not trying to convince you, but coming out from those like noble truths, this noble eightfold path actually becomes kind of like 10 commandments, right? It becomes like these are the ways that you can reduce suffering for everybody else around you too. These are the ways. So there's more to it than just a total focus on yourself. There's also as you look to reduce the suffering and decay, you're also looking to help other people in the same fashion. We're all kind of engaged in this together. So there's part of that
so
recognition.
okay,
Yeah.
so to steelman it, you're saying that there's a distinction because where maybe therapy is so self-centered, it's all about you. The Noble Eightfold Path begins to connect you to other people, not just to reduce your own suffering, but to
Right,
reduce
right.
suffering in the world more generally. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, yeah. And
So
so there's a whole bunch of ethics and how you're supposed to do this, right? So yeah.
Absolutely. And that's where, again, I would bring sort of a Nietzschean critique to that in the sense of like, I think as Christians with the social conditioning that we've had growing up, we have this thing of like, okay, well, we got to take care of everybody else and the weak and the poor. If they're suffering, that's a problem. Where a Nietzschean approach, I think, is beyond sort of emotive reasons that you might have to say, I don't like the idea of people suffering. I'd say you don't like that because you've been socially conditioned that way. Nietzsche would look at this and say, well, I don't care if other people suffer. Like I care about people suffering to the degree that it affects me, right? Like I don't care about pigs suffering. Pigs suffer all the time. They live in cages and then they get slaughtered and, like, so the degree to which I care about the suffering of another from, and again, this is so outside of a Christian perspective. Like we don't, like, it just repulses us. But that's just, I would say, again, from a Foucault or others, from sort of that's all part of your socially constructed reality that has come because of the world that you lived in. If you lived in ancient Mongolia or amongst the Vikings or amongst other groups throughout human history, your view of the need to reduce the suffering of all mankind would be like, but we live in a world of limited resources where the strong survive and the weak die. And so everyone is all about reducing everybody's suffering until it's like your kid is going to go hungry or your neighbor's kid is going to go hungry. Like you're going to choose your neighbor's kid to go hungry over yours. So while these may be nice sort of fluffy ideals in an ideal world, I don't think, and I mean this sort of, again, I'm not critiquing it from a Latter-day Saint perspective. I would critique it in saying that this path is just a social construction made by people who maybe do want to reduce suffering amongst other people because that's what they prefer to do. But there's nothing, it's just a manifestation of their preference.
Right. So you're it sounds to me like you're kind of bringing it back to almost a pragmatic approach. Like, oh, what's the value here? You spoke earlier of when you leave atheism, you lose that kind of grand cosmic purpose, right? What are we trying to do here? And it reduces down just to the individual or to the local. I think you use the word local,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's a lot of truth in that, and that, in fact, you'll see that a lot in your atheistic philosophies, including Buddhism, that rather than worrying about the grand cosmic purpose of the entire universe and what it's all about, There's much more of, well, what can we do right here, right now to make things better for us? That smaller, localized human way of approaching it
And
is
and I think that that's sort of the power, I think, of what people like Nietzsche are saying, is that they're looking at the big picture and saying, like, I don't disagree that Buddhism might be, it gives you sort of it can be very psychologically therapeutic to a person. I have no doubt of that. In fact, I think that I actually, from my religious perspective, believe that Buddhism helps you to put things in a proper perspective in many ways. It's kind of a complicated conversation. But the issue that I have is that it doesn't, like, Buddhism doesn't explain the nature of ultimate reality. It doesn't say why I have obligations to others. It doesn't say why humanity exists. It doesn't say where humanity came from. It doesn't provide a purpose that is, and I think what Nietzsche and some of these others do is they very boldly just go and say, there is no purpose, you guys. There is none.
right.
And it's whatever you make of it. If you go to Sartre, or I think it's Sartre,
Yeah.
It's sort of like you make your purpose. Like, you figure it out. You are totally free. And so I think Buddhism is merely just a manifestation of a particular, hey, we think this is a good way to do it. But that's just people's preference. There's nothing incumbent upon that as some sort of a truth about the nature of ultimate reality.
Well, yeah, it's not. I'm not really trying to convince you. We could get down this Buddhist rabbit hole for quite a while, because they would say the ultimate nature of reality is that it's up here. It's not necessarily as objective out there. That's the notion of emptiness. But that's, we're getting down rabbit holes. My point on hitting these is just to say there are other areas you can go that can be satisfactory for some people. It doesn't have to apply to everybody, right? So Buddhism, 800 million, 600 years before Christ was born, they were orienting themselves to a moral framework here based around reducing suffering.
Well, and I do agree that the Buddhism does provide that for people. What I would say is, okay, but what is the worldview that provides the most, that provides the best explanation of ultimate reality? And what are the implications of that explanation of ultimate reality? And I think one of the reasons that I struggle with Buddhism, when compared to something like, again, if I'm gonna take off my Latter-day Saint hat, I'm an atheist. I would look at Buddhism and say, it sounds like something that's a really good sort of therapeutic, but I don't know that it provides the best explanation for the nature of the world when compared to other explanations of what the ultimate nature of ultimate reality is. And I think, Troy, you because you're not a Buddhist.
Well, I practice some of the Buddhist meditation through the Sam Harris Waking Up app, which, he's secularized it, right? Sam Harris has taken all of the mysticism out of it, and it's purely a meditative practice. And you do learn things about your own mind and how you relate to the world. And I can see how it provides you with a kind of a spiritual guidance through your life and what you're doing, although it does not answer the grand cosmic questions that you propose a religion may need to answer. But you also, as a secularist or as an atheist, you aren't looking for grand cosmic purpose usually. You're looking for local purpose most of the time. At least that's my experience.
And see, I guess maybe that's sort of what I'm really concerned with isn't, is there a way that I can, I mean, heck, let's say we made a drug that just made you feel really good for 80 years and you took it and it was just like life's good, man. Like, I don't worry about any of this. All my existential angst is gone. I took the pill and now it's like I live very happily for 80 years and then I die and that's just it. And I don't worry about any of this stuff. I would look at that and I would say that may be a good strategy for getting through this 80 years with minimal suffering. But that doesn't answer any of the questions. That doesn't say what this is all about. It doesn't even say that this is worth it. You know what I mean? Because I could take another pill that just makes me feel really good for like 10 minutes and then I'm out of here. And
Right, right.
so again, I'm sitting here as an atheist looking at something like Buddhism or other things, and I'm saying my question isn't how can I feel really good for the next 80 years? My question is what worldview explains the nature of reality the best, and what are the implications of that for for the question of how should I live in the world? And what makes sense, or is it, and I think what I get to is it does really seem like if you take as a truth that there is no ultimate purpose, then we are all atomized individuals who can bond together and make alliances with one another to achieve whatever our particular local purpose that we create is. And what I'm struggling with is understanding how you escape that problem.
Right. So this is my perspective, just real briefly, is that rather than looking at it from there's a grand cosmic purpose out there we're trying to discover, that we as humans are very tribal. We evolved. You know, I'm an evolutionist, right? I believe in the scientific description of how we allegedly came to being. And so, because of our tribal natures, we are already aligned towards moral sentiments towards those of our own tribe, right? So that because it's necessary for us to survive, we had to be part of these tribes. So we have those positive tribal sentiments, but then we also have negative sentiments for those who are not of our tribe, right? The outside group.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as far as religion is concerned, to me, what religion has done is it's taken those tribal sentiments and codified them into some sort of structure of this is what we all believe in our tribe. We're using this as our totem around which we're going to build or structure our society for our grand cosmic purpose. Whatever that purpose may be, this is what drives us as our group. But it's still local, right? Inventing God, this would be like Nietzsche. I'm inventing God so that we, as a group, have something to shoot towards or something to drive us.
Yeah,
So God is invented for that purpose, but that doesn't necessarily mean that God is really there. It just means that the purpose of the tribe has put a grand cosmic purpose to give us impetus.
Yeah, so
you see the difference? Yeah.
So to steel man that, I think I see what you're saying. You're saying that if we're talking about preference, right, and we all sort of have these local purposes, well, we can ally ourselves with groups of people who have posited some sort of a purpose for life, right? Such as, Latter-day Saints. We have if you're really going to say what are we? We're a group of people who have a particular view about the purpose of life. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah.
And the people who join the church in a certain way, if not through birth, but through kind of consciously, they're saying, I ally myself with that. I'm going to say that, yes, that is the purpose of life. If I join some other group that has another view of what the purpose of life is, and these tribal groups that kind of have different versions of what the purpose of life is, and these can be minor variations, like within Christianity itself, we all sort of have a general view of what life's all about, but then we even split up even more into these doctrinal groups that have a little more specific version of how it's supposed to be and how it's supposed to go to live your life. And then we bond into these groups, and then these groups, maybe anciently or whatever, they would put as the god or gods, that is the one who is sort of, that's the ruler of this worldview, as it were, and these people that have come together, and they worship this god that gives their life its purpose, that has maybe dictated. God has said, the one who made the plan and gives the world its purpose, he has said X. And then people gather around that. So as a sociological phenomena, what religion is it is a manifestation of people tribalizing around what they think the purpose of life is. Is that a
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. One of the videos I made with Jonathan Streeter was religion is a social technology.
Hmm.
That we're viewing it through the lens of a progressive technology that hopefully we're getting better and better at more human rights for everybody that supposedly, but it's a technology that has developed way back in our ancient past to convey information, convey values, convey beliefs forward into each generation so that what we learned before, hopefully we can build on that for the next generation and build on that for the next generation. So you look at the ancient religions, they were often really tied to, the sky and where things were at certain times because that told them when to plant the crops. That told them, where to go to hunt and that sort of thing. Those were the ancient religions. They were tied into the real world, but they had a mystical component because that's what allowed people to treat it like law. Like, oh, we have to go over there because the star is rising in the east, the buffalo are coming. That's our religion. They don't know why, but they have, a belief that the buffalo god is coming or whatever. And that's the sort of thing you see in all religions throughout history is this propagation of belief and values that are tied in with certain mythical stories that help to move those things down the line and keep the tribe functional.
Yeah,
That makes sense,
and
yeah.
I think as I look at this from sort of a postmodern lens and I put on that hat, I say, well, if you have all these different groups and all these different groups have different ideas about what the purpose of life is, well, when you and Jonathan Streeter get on your podcast and you say, well, we hope that these technologies are improving more rights for everyone, there's implicit in that that part of our purpose in life is to spread human rights and dignity and prosperity to as many people as possible, right?
Yes.
Um, and that is a um, that is a social that is sort of the purpose, right? And
Life,
what a
liberty, and the
postmodern,
pursuit of happiness. Yeah,
yeah, and
that's
a
basically it. Yeah.
postmodernist might look at that and say, yeah, that's what you think, that's what you've invented. That isn't the actual purpose of the world. There may be people with other designs, and you have your preference to make the world that way, and then you will use the power that you have to enact that vision upon the world. And then they would ask, well, how is that any different from any other group who has their version of how the world should be and their purpose of what life is all about, and they use their power? Is there some purpose that is better than another, that is truer, or is it just that this is what you prefer? You prefer a world of universal human harmony, and the Nazis preferred a world of where the dominant race dominates.
Right. So you're asking the question of like, is there some sort of cosmic level that drives us towards better human flourishing or something, right? At a cosmic rather than
Well,
at a
well, I
local
would say
level.
I would say why is that even the goal at all? Like why is it the idea of universal human uh thriving for all and rights and that it's like I can't help but think back to people like Aristotle and then if I was indeed an atheist, and I'd say, look, human beings are not equal, first of all. We're not. That's a myth that was made up by a Christian society. Human beings are very different, and there are human beings that are. It's sort of like the best should rule, because why would you allow the same rights, like to vote and to control power, to people that are ignoramuses who can't be like you don't. We don't want to give power to 10-year-olds, but I can tell you there are 10-year-olds out there who I would trust with power over many adults. We don't believe in full, just because you're a human being, you have rights. And there are human beings that, from an atheistic worldview, if there's no, like, your utility is how useful you are to the collective or to my own ends, even. And so again, I'm not saying I believe those things. What I'm saying is that seems to me like a very powerful critique that if I were an atheist, and that's kind of what I want to do. I want to say, like, Troy, if I was an atheist, I wouldn't be a humanist. I wouldn't believe in human rights. I wouldn't believe in moral values and duties because I think those things are incoherent.
Yeah, a little. It sounds a little bit like you're telling on yourself.
I'm saying where I guess I'm just saying where I think that where I think atheism logically leads, because once you remove any sort of a purpose that anyone is tied to, I'm just like, well, then what makes your locally created purpose any more valid than anyone else's locally created purpose?
Yeah, so there's actually, you've got two things going on simultaneously. One is what is it that you want to do, your personal pursuit of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? That's my individual pursuit. Then there's the society in which you live. And so the classical liberal tradition, what I think we're talking about, is that they are not going to take position from a classical liberal about what makes you personally happy. Instead, we're going to create a society where the rule of law allows people to pursue whatever it is that they think allows them the most opportunity, including Buddhism or Stoicism or LDS faith or whatever.
Or
But
transgenderism.
Right. That would be within the classical liberal tradition of like, yeah, you can pursue whatever feels right to yourself, provided you're not impinging on the rights of anybody else. That's kind of the idea that they're trying to work out, or we are trying to work out as a classical liberal society.
And my, again, sort of the postmodern, maybe Marxist critique of that is that who are you to say where, like, why, like, human beings, if we're going to say that human beings have these rights that can't be violated or crossed, it's sort of like, that's just a manifestation of power. Because some group who's in power is determining who has what rights, and those people in power are going to structure the power according to what they prefer. And if you're a white heterosexual male who has dominated the power structures and the power design systems of all of Western society, well, then you're going to structure power according to the preferences that you have. And so why would I think that the rights that are being created by white heterosexual men are anything more than them controlling the boundaries of what's acceptable behavior within a society?
Yeah, so we're down a different rabbit hole now. This is kind of more the classical liberal approach.
Sorry,
which is fine, right? Because that's an important part of our societal understanding. But the idea of human rights comes from, it emerges out of Christianity through Locke primarily, with the idea that rights are inherent in who we are as people. Like you have a right to self-defense. So the purpose of government, according to the whole Enlightenment philosophy, is to preserve the rights of man. It's not to give rights, it's to preserve the rights we already have.
Yes.
And then the social contract is to come forward, and we're supposed to all get together and say, all right, within our social contract, we have agreed, rule of law, this is how we're going to live. If you don't, criminal. We are going to, put you in prison, or we're going to do something. And so the idea is that we can then compare different societies that are running by different philosophical or economical guidelines, I guess, and see how they do. And we can say, oh, let's look, power and preference country where everything's really handled well, North Korea. South Korea, right across the parallel, same people, same starting, different economic. Where would you rather live? What sort of society would you personally rather be part of? And when you look, there's problems in both, but most people say, oh, I think South Korea is probably the freer place where it would be happier, more opportunities. And that's all we're doing, I think, through any of this, is trying to do the best we can as humans on our pale blue dot circling the sun. And so nobody has like the perfect right answer. And in fact, that's a big part of the classical liberal idea, is that I am not God, you are not God. We don't know if the mind of God can be understood. And so we're just going to do the best we can by developing a society that's based around the rule of law rather than the rule of a dictator or the rule of, somebody who's telling everybody what to do.
And I think that and I think there is a practical argument there that these societies do work better, but I think the question that I would have is, but isn't that still ultimately power and preference playing out? You can say that certain people's preferences and use of power leads to broader levels of prosperity and fulfillment for that particular society. But within that society, you're always going to have people that are on the margins of it, who feel that their preferences are not being met, and that this society isn't structured well to the way that they want things to be. And what that implies is that and so I guess what I'm saying is that the people on the margins within any of those societies are always going to feel that they are being oppressed because they are in the minority. And because they are in the minority within that society, the power structures of that society are always, in a democratic society, the majority is ultimately the ones who hold the power. And so the majority are going to enact their preferences through power to structure society according to what is best for them. And so,
or perhaps what's best for their values, how they view it. See, one of the things is you're viewing it through this view of power and preference. But if you were a Buddhist, you might look at the same society and say, how are they doing on the suffering question, right? And they could come in and look at it from a different angle and say, well, we're orienting ourselves to, are they peaceful? Is there a lot of suffering? And if they could look at it that way rather than through who's in power and who's in charge and who's controlling things. It's just it's a choice of orientation as humans trying to say, how are we going to view this society?
And I think that's sort of what I mean. Your choice of orientation is the manifestation of your preference. You are choosing what I prefer Buddhism. Therefore, I want my society to be Buddhist. And so if it's a majority Buddhist country, then the Buddhist view of the world is going to win out. Now, if I'm somebody who prefers things that go contrary to Buddhism, I'm going to feel like I'm being oppressed by the society that I'm in because they are using their preference and their power against my preferences, but I don't have enough power to actually enact into the world what I want. It's in essence, though, this all is evolutionary, perfectly makes sense. What is evolution? It is human beings are another animal on the planet competing with one another for resources. We have the preference to survive, and power is just the adaptations that we bring to the table that actually allow us to survive and propagate our genetics. So this all fits.
That's all. It's all fair to view it through that lens. Yeah, and that's how I think we are trying to view it through that lens, but also through the lens of what works. There's a pragmatic element to it.
Well, and I think that pragmatic element, it works to what end? It works to achieve a particular preference. Now, here is where I think that there's an interesting sort of angle to take on this, and that is human nature. This is actually something that I've been really tossing over a lot because I think it's an incredibly important question. Are there things that we can say that are true about all human beings, right? In other words, are there things that we all prefer? This is what I mean by that. If there is, then that creates sort of a basis that you can make universal, because you could say, well, I prefer to live in a world where we enslave everybody who doesn't look like me. Now you could say that's a terrible idea or whatever. And it's like, well, if the vast majority of us, okay, had that same preference, then we would do it and we'd be happy with it because that's what we prefer. But there's a side to where you, I guarantee you right now, are feeling this. And most of us are like, but that would never work because human nature is such that to enslave another person, like you're never going to feel good about that because you're a human being and your common humanity would, or as you might put it, your evolutionarily designed emotions will revolt.
Human call them moral sentiments.
Yeah, your moral sentiments.
Moral sentiments.
But to say that human beings have moral sentiments is to say that there are things that are common to all human beings. There are certain things...
Are common enough, yeah.
Fine, common enough that if someone doesn't have it, we use words like "you're insane," or right. you could have a person that their preference is to go around and like stab babies because that's what they love to do, and we'd say that person needs to be locked up in an insane asylum. Which, by the way, was sort of Foucault's point. He was saying that, wait a minute here, the only reason we're locking up the person that in the insane asylum and calling them insane is because they don't match up with the majority power structure that exists. Okay? And so there's a deep question about human nature, because if human beings actually have a nature, then that means there is a right way to live and be happy, as the song goes, because we know there are wrong ways to live and be happy. You're never going to be happy just going around touching hot stoves everywhere you go. So it is in our nature as human beings not to touch hot stoves. And so I think that again, if I'm putting on the atheist hat trying to figure out this problem, I'm saying if we want to create any sort of a universal human ethic that is binding upon all sane human beings, we have to know what the nature of human beings are to such an extent that we can say no human being should touch a hot stove. You know, and I actually think that exists.
Yeah, I think so too. When we talk about objective morality, that's where I'm coming from, is that I think there is an objective, generalized human nature about people want to live their lives, be happy, and pursue the things like that. That's general. There are exceptions. There are sociopaths who don't want to get along with others, who want to pursue their own things. But they're the exceptions, right? They're the ones that we tend to criminalize.
Well, and it's weird because it poses a really, really, I think, a question that for an atheist is really, really hard. I think a religious person can have an answer to it. But
what's that question?
The question is well, why? Why do you get to label someone a psychopath? Because they have preferences that are so outside all you're saying is this person's preferences are so outside of the ordinary that we consider them insane. Like or let's use like the transgender stuff, right? That's kind of what we're asking. We're saying, are these people actually crazy, or are they or is this just their legitimate preference? You have your preferences, they have theirs. And why is it that the majority, because most people aren't like them, get to impose this label on them as though they are somehow, this is sort of queer theory, as they're outside of the norm?
Right, and I follow what you're saying as far as being within the norm or outside the norm. I don't think the transgender example is a very good one, though, because for the most part, it's not impinging on other people's rights. There are cases where I know that we have to work through that, although, again, we're kind of going down a bit of a rabbit hole here.
Yeah, and
but there are competing rights, right? We will always have competing rights as humans, and so we have to work through those issues.
Yeah, and I think that's but even more fundamentally, it's like if a person, I mean, you can go into weird examples, but you have to use extremes to kind of make the point. You know, if a person really gets a kick out of walking around naked in public, like, And why do we like? So what? Like, if a man wants to, or who are we to tell a a transgender man, transgender woman, a transgender woman, that he can't compete in women's sports, right? Do the like do these women, or like, who are we to, I don't know. That's kind of it's a harder example, but all I'm saying is we draw these lines around who we think is sane and insane. And on an atheist view, that is purely an arbitrary human construct created by the majority of someone is sane or insane.
It might be viewed that way. Part of what I kind of object to is that the idea that atheism is like a singular worldview, like it's all, we're kind of getting back to that. Oh, here's how an atheist has to view this, and I'm like, I don't think that they do have to view it through the power and preference lens, that we keep kind of circling back to. That is one lens, right? But I don't think it's the only way of viewing things.
I guess, and maybe you're right. I'm not saying that for sure is the case. My thing is it's like a black hole that if I put on my atheist hat, I say, okay, Jacob, throw all your religious assumptions out the window. What is the nature of the world fundamentally? I think amongst human beings, I go, well, the nature of the world fundamentally is we're animals competing for resources to reproduce. And everything else is a social construct. And social constructs...
Yeah. So, some of it's evolutionary, biological. I think biology plays a big part in who we are. But
yeah, and fair enough. So if, again, I'm looking at you not as Jacob Hansen, the Latter-day Saint, but as Jacob Hansen, the atheist, I'm going, Troy, it seems that all that really exists on the fundamental level is our biological systems, which don't have us hardwired for truth. They have us hardwired for survival. Survival is about the power to get what you desire to survive. And all social systems emerge from that base fundamental reality, and they're all socially constructed. And so what those social constructs are manifestations of power. Right. And then I go read the philosophers that talk about that, and I go, man, these guys seem like they really know what they're talking about.
Yeah, don't forget the fundamental biology there, that we do have built in those moral sentiments that Hume talks about, and so do a lot of these philosophers, that they point out our core shared humanity is where we get our notions of morality, our notions of law, our notions of well-being. All of that is pretty well shared, and so that's where we can say, oh, we have a common consensus around what it means generally to be human and what we're trying to do as humans.
And this is actually, this is a huge point that you just brought up, because that shared humanity, how tight is it? And this is what I mean by that. So, Forrest and I have talked about this, my brother and I. We would say there are some things that kind of all human beings prefer, right? And so we will, but the problem is there's always exceptions to that. And sometimes there's big exceptions to that, right? And so we will create, as someone like Foucault might say, arbitrary boundaries around what is acceptable and not, based around the majority's moral sentiments. But the problem is, like, there's sort of an assumption that, well, these, to use a bigger example, no one is going to feel okay. Well, I'm not going to say no one. I'm going to say 99% of people will feel bad abusing a child, right? So we create a law that says you can't abuse children, right? This is wrong. It's bad. But there are a small percentage that think that that's okay, or that actually would enjoy that. Now that's an extreme example. What do you do when that percentage changes to like 60-40? Right? What do you do? Like, the problem is human beings we all are very different. We have very wildly different preferences. And so you begin to create laws, you begin to create customs, you begin to create norms of, but these norms are all based on, if we have these moral sentiments, but they're not universally shared.
They're mostly universally shared. I mean, to me, what it sounds like you might be getting at is that, there's a lot of gray in morality when we're looking at it, especially from just a purely human standpoint, right? Where we can't make an appeal to some divine being that's going to tell us what's right or what's wrong. And I think it's okay to recognize that as humans, to say, look, we're just doing the best we can here. We're just trying to figure this out as we go. There are a lot of different philosophies, a lot of different ways to handle this. We can look at it through that pragmatic lens of what works and contextualize ourselves into what we want to pursue: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Let's look at the countries that do that the best. Let's look at the philosophies that do that the best. Let's look at what works. And religion has historically been a key part of advancing humanity and helping humans to get better. It's a social technology. And so, it's not an either or proposition. It's an and proposition.
And to steal, man, kind of what you're saying that you're saying society is getting better. It's making progress. Yes. There's thriving that's happening. Again, I guess my postmodern critique of that is, progress according to your standards.
Well, according to human standards, right? You can go look at something like humanprogress.org, and you can see all the poverty being eradicated. You can see disease going away. You can see, births getting better. You can see, so there is this progress of human flourishing that is trackable, is measurable, that's been going on for hundreds of years, and it's gotten better wherever we have adopted these principles of human rights. The Western ideals have helped that go along. And so we can actually measure that. We can say, oh, look at this. And this is Sam Harris. Well-being, we can look at a peak over here and say, oh, they're doing well at this. Over here, they're doing well at this. And we can compare, right? That's the approach. But no cosmic one-size-fits-all solution. Instead, it's a messy, gray-shaded, we're figuring this out as we go. That's why we have podcasts.
And that's, and I can see that. Again, I'm putting on that atheist hat, and I say that, yes, things have gotten better for the majority, but there are always going to be the minority groups on the fringes who have preferences that don't align with the majority. And that group is going to be oppressed by the majority. So
maybe not oppressed. I mean, that's that power and preference way of looking at it. There's all sorts of things. They may or may not be oppressed. I mean, you're a Latter-day Saint, right? Uh-huh. I don't think. Do you feel oppressed living in the United States of America for your religious beliefs?
No, but I would say that the systems of power in the United States are structured to be able to allow a Latter-day Saint to be able to do what they want. The structures of power in the United States are not geared towards allowing someone who is a racist to do what they want.
That's true.
So if I prefer racism, if I'm someone who prefers to live in a society where no one looks different from me, I am being oppressed by the power structures of my society.
You can view it through the lens of your being oppressed, I suppose. Another way is you can view it as you're being prevented, not being, you're being prevented from harming others within the society that doesn't want to have the racist.
Well, that's the thing is there's a side to, but that is to say that whether I'm being prevented or whatever it is, I'm not being allowed to live my authentic self. I'm not allowed to be who I really am as a racist or as any number of things, right? We can look back and just say, well, in the past, sexual minorities were oppressed by society. But that's just because the majority had a preference that said that we don't like that. Well, the majority of people say that we don't like a wide variety of different things: prostitution, polygamy, any number of things that exist out there that we think are bad for our society. And so people enact laws. Now, the libertarian view is to say, essentially, like, we want to minimize the use of force and let people sort of be their authentic selves. But even that has its limits, right? And so,
this is where I'm saying, morality is progressive, right? I think that we can say things have gotten better for more and more people over time, and I think that's demonstrably true, in general. And I think it's because of these principles and values that we're discussing here.
And I would agree, but I would agree in the sense, again, I have that atheist hat on. I would agree that more people now are able to get their preferences in a society like the United States. But there always will be a boundary to that. And that boundary is a social construct created by those in power. And those who are in the woke movement, what those people are, is they're the people who say, this power structure doesn't serve everyone. And it needs to be changed so that the minorities in our society are able to be their authentic selves without facing the oppressive structures of people looking down on them for trying to live their truth. And I would use an example to go to the kind of men and women sports issue. Those people, their nature is such that they feel terrible if they're not treated as a woman fully. And so because of that, you are going to arbitrarily say, you're not a woman. We're not allowing you to be your authentic self, the way you truly feel on the inside. And you now have to live a lie and have people use the wrong pronouns and do all this stuff. And it makes you incredibly uncomfortable. And what they're saying is, no, this is all a social construct. Let's adjust the social construct so that these people can be included in our society. And right, I think that's a very powerful argument.
Right. I don't see the downside, because it's very similar to like the race issue, right? There was a time when a lot of people were very racist, like you said, historically, and then there had to be this slow change of people. Well, maybe this racism thing isn't so good because we're treating people as a lesser beings because of the color of their skin. And so that had to change. The zeitgeist had to change. Maybe something similar is happening right now with the sexual mores of humans in the West.
Or let's go to the racial issue. This is, but I see what I'm saying is this doesn't just cascade into queer theory. This cascades into things like critical race theory, because we constantly see certain minority groups who are achieving substandard results compared to other groups. And then I look at that and I say, well, the power structures, the dynamics of our society are not serving these people as well as it's serving other groups of people.
That's a hypothesis for why that's the case.
Right? Yes. And what is the alternative? That apparently black people or other people, other minorities of other groups, this society is not serving them well, because if it was serving them well, they would have the same outcomes as the other people in our society, unless you're going to posit that they're in some way different from everyone else.
Or that the society is based on opportunity, not on outcome.
And so they just
That's the other difference.
And right? So they just aren't taking advantage of the opportunities? They don't care about opportunity as much as everybody else?
That may be the case. It may be other things, that they may not have some of the same opportunities. It may be that they're not as driven. That we're kind of in that classical. liberal direction again.
The only reason I'm bringing this up is because and you said, my views is to say that if there is, like, I'm basically defending the woke worldview. And the reason I'm defending it is because I actually think, given certain assumptions about the world, it makes a lot of sense. And it makes a lot of sense that this society, however it's structured, whatever its opportunities are, whatever the social systems are that create motivation in one group versus another group, there are social systems that are not like the power. If you have equal power, then you will get equal results. So these people they don't have the same amount of power. I don't mean just political power. I mean social power. I mean all of that stuff. And so white people have white privilege because the power dynamics of the society at all different levels, sociological, political, religious, cultural, all of it, they play to your advantage. And we know that it plays to your advantage because your group comes out better in this society.
Yeah, that would be the hypothesis you would need to check, right? You would need to say, oh, are white people or that group outperforming these other groups? You go and look, nope, they're not. So that hypothesis is almost immediately falsified.
Well, so. And I won't go into that. I think that, no, I think you can show, for instance, that black people are incarcerated more than any other group.
You changed. You just switched. You went to black people, and you were talking earlier about white privilege. Because if you look at like Pew Research studies, they go and rank by race, which I think is kind of silly to do it by race anyway. But, how much do people earn based on race and stuff? Who makes more than white men right now? The average working Asian woman makes more than the average working white man in the United States of America right now, today. And then it goes up from there, right? Pakistanis make more.
And fine,
Nigerians
maybe our
make
society,
more, Indians make more.
And maybe our society is very well, the power structures work very well for Asian women. But for some reason, our power structures in our society are not serving black males.
So that's assuming that the power structures are supposed to serve a certain demographic or something. In the classical liberal society, that's not what we're about. We're about opportunity, right? We're about people pursuing their own life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Not about a nanny state that's trying to come in and equalize everybody to be at the same level.
See, and as an atheist, though, I would again, putting on my atheist hat, I'd say, but that assumes that people are the product of their choices freely made and not the product of the systems and their conditions and their biology. See,
all of those things would be factors. It wouldn't be an either or thing, but yeah.
See, and I would say as an atheist, I would say no, people don't have free will. And the way people turn out are based on the conditions that you put them in, because people don't make free choices. They respond according to the stimulus of the environment that they're in. And so
now, we could do the free will thing too. I've got a compatibilism.
Sorry, I want to, there's obviously so much we could do, but I guess just to kind of wrap this up.
I've got all sorts of other slides here.
Yeah, I know you do. I know we're already getting way into this. This is gonna be a really long episode. Let's go ahead and move on though from that. All right. So Stoicism, another worldview. Let's go to that.
Yeah, we could probably just blow through these real quickly because I think we're hitting on some of the main issues. My point is just that there are lots of other ways of viewing the world secularly that could bring you happiness in life. So
yeah,
Stoics,
I don't deny that. Just I don't deny that there are. I would say it. Again, if being a cynical atheist, I'm going to put on my cynical atheist hat.
Yeah, see, and I keep trying to tell you, there are other atheist hats you can wear. All of these 9.
Well, what I guess, and that's the thing is, I'm saying is which one seems to make the most sense. I would look at this and I would say, yeah, Stoicism, that's like another pill that you can take, right? It can make this world that you live in, which does, like, the question I'm really asking is, what is the nature of ultimate reality? These things can give you they're like a pill that you take that makes it feel good while you're here for 80 years, right? But the reality is you're only here for 80 years, and the best you can do is to make yourself comfortable while you're here.
Or to pursue or find meaning, I mean, I think it's fair to say in pretty much all of the atheistic worldviews, yes, death is coming for you, you will die, and because you know that is coming, then a lot of your living is like, well, what am I going to do with my time? How do I find purpose, meaning, fulfillment? The substitution hypothesis.
Yeah, and
that
I
we
would
were
say,
talking
and I
about for
would say
religion,
that
right?
that is merely, again, putting on the atheist hat. That's merely us trying to cope.
Well, the atheist might also say, hey, LDS believer, that's just you trying to cope.
Yeah, and
You've just come up with this, plan of salvation thing
I
to
would,
make you feel better.
and
Yeah.
that's what I would say is as kind of a postmodern view. I'd say, yeah, everyone. What is everyone doing? Everyone's doing the exact same thing. We're here. There is no purpose to it. It's an accident. We are animals. And what we're doing is we're just trying to make up stories to tell ourselves, to make ourselves feel better until we die. And that's it. That's the world.
Yeah, there's a certain element to which I would say that you are correct. However, I don't think that that's necessarily like, if you've been raised LDS with a grand cosmic purpose, the plan of salvation. We're here for a reason. We're here to learn. We're here to grow and get better. When you drop all that, when you lose all that, the more we're just animals on the planet, man, that feels like a huge loss, right? You're like, man, why would I ever want to believe that we're just animals on this planet trying to figure ourselves out? The atheist response is because that's what the facts support. That's why you end up there. It's not because you want to.
Yeah, no, and I would say, and my thing is, I would look at it, and I would actually agree in the sense of like, okay, so the sensible thing is we're here, so how do we make it through this? Maybe we can actually really enjoy our time here. Maybe our time on Earth can be a time that is 80 years that are wonderful, that are just. At the end of it, you look back on it and you go, this was worth every second. I'm really glad I had this 80-year experience. To Steel Man, I totally get that as an atheist position. The issue I have with it is then, well, what if the best way to get through this 80 years is to tell yourself that God exists, that there's a great cosmic plan. It's sort of like the best way to live your life is actually to figure out whatever fantasy you can, like whatever you got to tell yourself to make this good, like go for it. Because then what it does, it changes the entire purpose of life, comes down to how well can you make it go while you're here? Truth be damned. Because truth is only, like the only reason to value truth is to the degree to which it serves you in this, I'm trying to enjoy these 80 years as much as possible.
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I would say that for most people, it's not just all about themselves too, right? They're in that fabric of society, of friends and family. And so I think a lot of people think about their legacy, what they're doing to improve their children's lives or their friends' lives or whoever else. So they fit into that rubric of going through time where, I'm a little flashlight that passes through the world, but I might have shown a little bit more light, and that's enough, I think, for a lot of us who are kind of atheistic to say, oh, I brightened the world a little bit. My time here was time well spent. Even though you're right, in the end, it doesn't really mean anything except to other humans, which is all.
Yeah, I can see that. But what I would say though is that maybe the best thing I could do is get my kids to believe a lie, a useful fiction, right? So if I think the church,
So you do scripture study.
Yeah, no, I'd be like, I may not believe it, but boy, I want my kids to believe this stuff because I know that their life will be so much better. The issue that I get to there is then everything becomes purely utilitarian. And if everything's purely utilitarian, then the question isn't if the church is true. The only question is how useful it is.
Yeah, is the church useful, right?
That's it.
Yeah, now you're in the range where Jonathan and I were talking about, because we're looking at religion from a utilitarian, functional standpoint, saying what value does it have, and coming to the conclusions that there is lots of value in religious beliefs for, finding goodness in life. but that we're also approaching it kind of as a cafeteria approach, right? Well, we're going to find some stuff in some religions, maybe some stuff in other philosophies, try and work things out, and maybe advance some ideas about what makes life worth living.
But I would say that takes you to a Pascalian view of the world, and to Pascal's notion that the best way to live your life is to actually place your faith in this sort of higher cosmic purpose, because your life will never be, even if that isn't true, if it's a possibility that it's true, you can then place your faith in that, build your life around that proposition that it does actually have meaning and purpose and something bigger. And then at the end of it, it doesn't matter because you would have been better off either way. Right?
Yeah. So, like what William Lane Craig says, if there's a 1 in a million chance that, Christianity is true, that's good enough for him, because that provides him with enough impetus to push ahead. And that's fine for William Lane Craig, right?
And I think that there is also the consideration. I'm actually going to be doing a video on Pascal and his wager, is that human moral sentiments are such that if you know that it's false, or if you are 99.99999999999% sure that it's false, your moral sentiments will never let you be happy pretending to something that isn't there.
Right. Yeah. And I agree with that. That's why I left the church, right? Is that my estimation after looking into things, I was like, oh, dang, man, I really wanted this, after I was living my life that way, to hold up. It doesn't withstand scrutiny. Mm-hmm. What am I going to do about this now? And so you go off looking for a substitute. And that's, I end up in the scientific skeptics thing, but all of these other atheistic viewpoints have their own value too. They're all approaching this human question of how do we find meaning, value, and purpose in life from different angles, but without the apparatus of religion. So should I just hit these real quick? They're each real short.
Yeah,
I didn't go into depth. Secular humanism. I'm sure you're familiar with this, right?
Yep.
It first came out in 1948, but they've redid it in 2018. Let me switch over, and I'll just keep going through these then. This is Ayn Rand's objectivism, right? Mm-hmm. So she's very atheistic. Rational self-interest, individualism, capitalism. She's actually really good for artists and musicians and stuff, because she's very much about being true to your artistic, or your what would you call it? Your ambitions, your drive. She sees that value in life comes from the motive power of what you do. Mm-hmm. So she's all about achievement, right? That's Ayn Rand. Do things and you will be happy. Then there's utilitarianism. This is very much along with Sam Harris's well-being. In fact, I think that really his moral landscape is just an addendum to John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, which is just maximizing happiness for the greatest number, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that one. There's existentialism. You mentioned this before. Jean-Paul Sartre, Heidegger. And this is the emphasis on responsibility, freedom, and authenticity. And then, of course, there's the pushback, Albert Camus, who I really like, which is basically saying, hey, yes, we live in this crazy, absurd universe where nothing makes any sense. Accept it. Accept it and get on with living your life. That's basically his viewpoint, is embrace the absurdities. He has the beautiful myth of Sisyphus, which at the very end, he says, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. Mm-hmm. And that's, basically the whole Camus absurdist idea, is that you can find peace and pleasure in your daily life largely through your attitude and how you approach living. Mm-hmm. So that's him. There's the pragmatics. William James also invented psychology. The beginning of psychology comes from him. He wrote a book called The Varieties of Religious Experience. Mm-hmm. And so this is the idea that truth is determined. This is kind of Jordan Peterson, by its consequences, right? By what happens down the road, whether or not something was true. I'm sure you've heard that discussion between Peterson and Harris.
Yeah.
Where they argue about what truth is. And I think Peterson's more a pragmatist. Anyway.
I would agree.
Well, I've only got two left here. So then there's naturalism. I think Daniel Dennett's in this camp too, which is the idea that science is the way to understand the world, and so all phenomena are explained by natural causes and laws. And then the last one, I actually made a video on this on my channel, but scientific pantheism, which is kind of just a metaphor that God is the cosmos. Richard Dawkins calls scientific pantheism sexed up atheism because it's still an atheistic belief, but you're just trying to say, oh, God is the cosmos, whatever.
Yep.
Science is the way to know the mind of God. And I think Carl Sagan is probably one of the best. He never called himself a scientific pantheist, but he kind of advocated for that view of if we can understand the universe and to know it, we'll know the mind of God. And if there is some sort of, supernatural being or deity behind it, this is probably the way to get at it, is through this scientific approach of trying to understand the universe. So anyway, those are all my slides. I'm sorry we had to accelerate through the last group of them.
Sorry I kind of derailed us, but I think it's all germane to this idea of where does atheism take you on those questions, right? So far as what I can tell is that I'm not denying, just so you know, I don't deny that there are other worldviews that people can, or that people do adopt, that bring them satisfaction and sort of a sense of meaning and purpose and all those things in their life. What I'm saying is, my argument is more, if I were an atheist, I don't find any of those compelling in the sense that they solve the fundamental problem. And I think in this sense that they don't solve, I think that the greatest atheistic thinkers have been the ones who have fully embraced the problem and embraced the implications of it. And I think that that's why some of those thinkers, those continental philosophers that you had mentioned, that's why as an atheist, if I put on that atheist hat, I find them so powerful because they're not so much asking the question of like, how do we live a good life now? How do we find happiness now? That's not what they're doing. They're more looking at what's true. And they're basically saying, look, here's the bottom line. The bottom line is we are in a purposeless universe. We are an accident of biology and chemistry and other forces in the universe. We are, the drivers that drive us are survival, and the way we get our survival is through power, meaning power is the ability to get those things which we prefer. And everything in society reduces down ultimately to those things. Everything else, it's just window dressing, it's just social constructs, it's man-made myths, and then based on that, they kind of call out, well, you're just trying to do you're trying to socially construct the world according to the way that you pursue your preferences, and these people are trying to construct the world according to their preferences. And what it ultimately boils down to is exactly what we'd predict in biology: a struggle for survival amongst different groups. And I can't help but look at that and be like, that's really compelling.
Right, and I don't think anything I've said here is in direct opposition to that, right? The power and preference is part of the discussion, right? It's not a false dichotomy where it's either or, though. I'm trying to make the case that there are a lot of different viewpoints, and when you say it reduces all down back to just power and preference. I'm like, I don't think that it does reduce back down to only power and preference. Humans, as being who we are, we care about each other. We have these moral sentiments um, for wanting to build up our families and our legacies that are also built into us by evolution just as well. We care and love one another as a result of those same forces that developed us into. It's like, humans are very much like chimps or wolves or dolphins or elephants. These are all other social mammals that have, drives to survive. And they also have moral structures that are built into the
Well,
way that they live
and
too.
so I actually want to take away a word in there that I think that maybe causes confusion. Let's just call them sentiments.
Okay.
We don't have to call them moral sentiments, because that maybe implies that certain sentiments are right and certain sentiments are wrong.
Well, they're called moral sentiments because they are the reactions you have to a moral question. That's where Hume gets it from. Is the idea that, oh, I've been presented with a moral question, like you said, slapping a little child is a good one, right? Slapping a little child, how do you respond? What that's all about? That's a moral sentiment, right? I felt that's a bad thing, moral. I made a moral judgment. Where did that come from? And he's saying, or the idea is that a lot of that's built in from your tribal nature, and then layered on top of it is your social, whatever environment you've been raised in.
Well, see, and that's obviously a big question, because we come down to say, okay, well, we have these sentiments that we react to moral issues, somebody slapping a child or something. Well, what's to say that this is, again, the social construction question. If you look at the moral sentiments of Romans versus the moral sentiments of people today, they're quite different.
Right.
And not only that, even within a given society today, there are people whose moral sentiments we would say are not correct. In other words, we're saying there's some sort of moral sentiments that everyone is supposed to have, and if you don't have them, you're a psycho and we lock you in jail. Or we'll use a different form of power against you, which is to make you a total social pariah, and nobody wants to associate with you because you're a freaking weirdo, right? And so that sort of social ostracizing power also is at work. So there are these power dynamics that are constantly at play, and that are shaping the moral sentiments. So to say that we have moral sentiments, I look at these philosophers and they say, yeah, maybe there's some baseline there, but the majority of your moral sentiments have been formulated by the social context that you find yourself in, being a white, heterosexual, post-Christian male in 21st century United States. And if you were in Afghanistan and you were born in the year 1800 and lived in a village, your moral sentiments would be wildly different. And so it isn't like there's this universal human nature that we all share that everyone has to conform to. We all are individual, unique creatures with our own sentiments.
Yeah, so what you've said there, the first part, the biological universal moral sentiments, that is accepted as around the world, that we all see the same sorts of things. Whether you're Chinese, whether you're Hindu, whether you're Indian, whether people are interested in the same things for their families, their same things for who they are. That basic tribal sort of, I want to take care of myself, take care of my family, that was with the Romans. That goes all the way back in time. That's the biology. That is still with us, right? That has not changed. So when I'm talking about moral sentiments, those are still there. Those tribal moral sentiments about what's right and wrong. What's writing on top of that is the social construct that you're talking about, and what people have done in their respective societies to try and fulfill those drives for moral sentiments, for trying to get what they survive. And that second layer has been changing and progressing over time. It was one way in the Romans. We've changed it through Christianity. We've moved into a secular age. And as we have changed, our laws have gotten better, or more and more people have been able to fulfill, hypothetically based on our stuff, their human desires, right? And so we can see a progress in the changing of the social layer, even though our biological layer of what we desire is not changing, we're still fundamentally the same human beings we were, a million years ago. But our society has changed tremendously about what we value and about, how we relate to one another. We've tried to expand the tribe over time, right?
So,
the little
so you would
tribes
say
have
that
gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
so at some level, you would say that there is a right way for a human being to live.
For the most part, I would for yes, I'm going to say yes generally, but I'm going to say it's dimly lit, right? It's not like this obvious. You can go and just run down this list. Instead, I think it's one of those things you have to figure out as you go throughout life. And I'm in favor of that cafeteria approach. Study everything, learn what you can, take the best from different places, and try and assemble something that works for you.
And I think, I think I can get behind that. I think there's a very interesting thing though. There's a huge implication in that. It's to say that our human natures actually, because you are a human being, there is actually some path that is the right path. Because if you
multiple
go
paths, but yes.
If you go, well, yes, we say that the path is more broad or narrow. That's the complicated part, right? It's like, how wide or how narrow is that path? This is the thing that within the church, like the church, people say the church isn't good for everyone, but it's very good for some people. This assumes that there are people who have a different set of sort of their constitution, their nature is different from another person's nature. So what works for a person with nature X is different for a person with nature Y. And what I'm saying is that says, well, but wait a minute. There is some nature as human beings that we all share.
Yeah, that I think we do all share.
And
yeah.
if we say that, that means you can say, I think objectively, if you're a human being, you should not do X because it runs contrary to your nature as a human being.
Yes, I think that there's some general truth to that. Yeah.
And that's a very fascinating thing to say because in a way that can form the basis of a worldview that is in many ways religious in its replacement. And it's saying, look, I want to understand the nature of human beings so that we as human beings can fulfill our nature as such. And that is the pathway to the highest level of existence that we can possibly experience as human beings.
And I think most of the philosophies are trying to get at that, right? They're trying to figure out, how do we live a better life? How do we do better? How do they're all pushing that direction.
But
whether it's Buddhism or Stoicism or whatever.
You're right. Well, what you're creating is, but it is based on the idea that they're looking for that truth about humanity, about our nature as human beings, right? And if we're not looking, I think, and this is maybe at least to put right next to each other, the two different viewpoints, the fully unconstrained view of humanity. There is no ultimate human nature. We all are totally unique individuals. And so you can never say to anyone, there is only your truth and my truth, right? Because there is no common shared nature amongst us as human beings. It's, you have to do you, man. And then the other one says that there is, at least at some level, there's some baseline thing that says, you have to at least be doing these things if you want to be happy. And I think that's almost undeniable. Like, you have to eat food. You have to, there are basic things that have to be met. But we would say that above and beyond that, there's room for truly preference. Like, you are unique. You are both a human, but you fit within the human category. But that's a very broad category. And then within that, there's a bunch of well, I like football, you like golf, and, there's no right or wrong answer to those questions. But the questions of morality, ultimately what they are, is they're questions about the universal things, like you shouldn't touch a hot stove.
But yeah, the morality in particular to me relates to how humans relate to other humans. So it's that when I'm talking about a social technology, it's about how do we humans interact with other humans to maximize our well-being. That's the root of morality. I don't think you have any moral questions at all if you're living completely alone on a desert island, right? There's no other humans at all. Your moral questions just drop to near zero because there's like nothing to worry about other than maybe suicide.
And I frame that very differently in the sense that the ought, the should, the word that we use there, the way I see it is it's a statement of direction. If you want to go to San Diego from LA, you should go south. But what if you want to go to San Francisco? Well, then you should go north. So it depends on where you're trying to go.
Where you're trying to go, yeah.
But the thing is I do believe one of the shared things of human nature that we all share is a desire for our own well-being. All of our human behavior, this goes back to Aristotle, everything you do is basically to try and move closer towards a concept I call UDM or UWD, ultimate well-being, or UWB, ultimate well-being. Some concept of like the good life, the good whatever it is. Even if I was alone on an island, I should not do things that bring me suffering, because I would assume, or I would say to you, even if you're alone on an island, I'd say you should do things that, bring you towards well-being, because I assume you're a sane human being, and by nature, that's what you desire. That's where your road you want it to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm agreeing with you that if you're on a desert island, it's going to be better to go fishing than to hit myself in the head with a coconut. That's not going to do me any good. But to me, that's not really a moral question. That's kind of a survival one. But as soon as somebody else arrives on the island, now we're dealing with morality issues and how to interrelate. That's how, to me, morality is about social interaction.
Well, shoot, how do we sum this up? What? Give me your thoughts.
Well, I think that we have quite a few areas of agreement. In particular, although I don't know exactly how you feel about human rights, it does seem to be pretty clear that you're oriented towards the idea of well-being, right? And I think that, I also, non-religious person, am oriented towards ideas of well-being, and we both want to see humanity get better. And so, to me, conversations like this help us to explore, test one another's ideas, work things out, see what works, see what doesn't, and hopefully get better. And I want to say progress our moral sentiments, progress our moral understanding just a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I think, obviously, as a Latter-day Saint, I see you as a fellow child of God. I see all people as fellow children of God, and that we're all moving towards we all are progressing, because there is such thing as progress, towards towards what we're going to ultimately be. And I think that, like I said, conversations like this, they help us get closer at the truth. I think that the truth isn't just what's useful. I think I have faith in truth, if that sounds kind of weird. It's that I actually believe that knowing the nature of reality is what will bring us happiness, which isn't a given per se. It's a statement of faith. And so, yeah, I agree. I think that conversations like this help move that ball forward as we try and figure out what the heck is the nature of ourselves and other people.
Yeah, like when you say, I am a child of God, that to me is the same basic sentiment as everybody has human rights. So I see these as kind of the same aligned way of viewing the world, right? That if you view your fellow humans as children of God, you're going to treat them a certain way. And if you view your fellow humans as having human rights inherently, you're going to treat them a certain way. And so I see us as aligned, even though we're at completely different viewpoints regarding lots of other truth claims.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Troy, It's been a blast, man. Thanks for.
Yeah, we went a lot longer than I thought, and it's fun. Yeah, we could do this all day long.
I think we could. I don't think that you're going to be able to get me and you together without having a really long
Go sideways.
conversation. Yeah, and just so you know, obviously we're still going to be bantering on Facebook and in other places, so that will continue, and I enjoy it. So when I say things that you think are stupid, please drop them in the comments.
Well, we need to talk free will sometime. I need to convince you about Dennettonian version of free will because, yeah.
I would love to do that. That's a topic that it's always a mind bender for me. I even though I have pretty strong feelings on it, it's one that I have to admit that I know there are holes even in my arguments, and I know about them, and I'm trying to reconcile them. And I think anywhere people go on that question, it gets crazy. So it'll be a fun conversation.
Yeah, I really like Daniel Dennett, and he's underrepresented. So I want to get out there and sell more Dennett.
Cool. All righty. Well, thanks so much, Troy. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Jacob.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button so my future videos show up on your feed. Also, if you or someone that you know has benefited from the content here on Thoughtful Faith, please consider becoming a channel donor or volunteer by visiting my new website, thoughtfulfaith.org, and clicking on the Get Involved page.